So, time management and creating a productivity system. My name is Marcus Weakley. I'm the director of the Center for Writing and Rhetoric, and I'm very happy that you're joining me here today, Troy and I, the senior consultant at the center. Troy, do you mind saying hi real quick?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Troy. I'm monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to write them in there, and I'll either direct them to Marcus, or if they're technical things, I'll try and take care of them.
Great. Thank you, Troy. I appreciate you being here. So I want to start with the chat today. If you've never used Zoom before, you'll find the chat box at the bottom of your screen, or there's an icon for chat, and then you click it and the chat box will come up on the right. Would love if you wouldn't mind just a short reply to the question, why are you here today, as a starting point? What's drawn you to a webinar on time management and creating a productivity system? So it just needs to be a sentence at most. It can even be just a phrase, but you know, what is motivating you to come to a session like this today? Great, so gaining some skills, solidifying habits, preparing for an upcoming semester, so much to keep track of, increase effectiveness. Yeah. Very good. Great, being pulled in multiple directions. Yes, so that is my life. Constantly feeling like I've got too much to do, being pushed in any number of directions, demands on my time from numerous areas. So a lot of what's motivated me to approach my life in this way and to start a system like this really is the same sort of, or at least one of the veins of what all of you are mentioning in the chat. Thank you so much for dealing with, you know, these typically multifaceted sets of demands that are, you know, and the desire to live, you know, in some sense a meaningful and enjoyable life as well, even with all of, you know, the different demands that are coming. And then the other main idea that I saw expressed just real briefly there is that idea of starting a new program, right? Like embarking on something new for those of you who are incoming students. And that is, again, a great time to reevaluate how you have been doing things, because there are going to be this new set of demands or this new shift in how your time is spent. It's great to beforehand to think about how you intentionally want to approach that. And so I'm super thankful that you're here, because that in itself is showing that you're approaching this situation from the type of perspective that will set you up for success in your degree. So the goals that I've set here today are to cover some time management techniques, to move towards increased efficiency, effectiveness in planning, and a work-life balance, and to explore what it means to approach this as a system. So I really appreciate systems thinking, which we're not going to talk too much about explicitly. It's one of the fundamental elements of transdisciplinary research, which is a core value of Claremont Graduate University. But systems thinking is really approaching circumstances that we typically might look at in terms of a single event or a single instance as a larger connected set of elements that all relate to each other in some sort of way that produce patterned behaviors over time. And as you might imagine from that brief definition, we ourselves are systems, right? So our daily life is a system, our psyche, our psychological self, our self-conception, which is part of that psychological self, as well as the things that we actually do, our habits, our relationships. You know, the system can be our physical body, which is a system, or all those broader aspects combined can be approached as a system. systems within systems, as systems thinking likes to say. But we're not going to talk too much about that explicitly in terms of the theory, but in practice, I want to give some concrete examples, because we don't have that much time, about what it looks like to approach time management or the way you spend your time or your habits as a system instead of just a set of skills. So we'll do both. We'll start with why small changes over time. That's a key element of how I approach this. Then we'll look at identity-based goals, for sure. So shifting goals from being just really task-based desired outcomes to broader outcomes based on our identities. First moves for how to make this system or tweak an existing system. And then some ideas for long-term shifts and other resources at that point. I do want to mention that some of this material is adapted from James Clear's Atomic Habits. It is a good book. I'm not translating everything directly over from that. I found resonance with a lot of what he's talking about and things that I had already been doing in this webinar previously, as well as I really liked his engagement with feedback loops and some other key elements of systems thinking in there, along with neuropsychological research. So if you want to do a bit of a deeper dive, I recommend that book. As you'll see, it's linked here. It's available for you through the CGU library, and I will be sending a PDF of this PowerPoint to everyone after the webinar. So you'll be able to access the book there. So the first thing I want us to stop and think about, because the best new habits and the best change to a system and the best time management changes are going to be done in a sustainable way. We're not going to try to go 100 from the start. We're going to build up and integrate sustainable changes so that they actually last, right? So the first idea here is a shift in mindset. So as I mentioned, starting a new degree is a great time to make changes if that's what you're doing. Your hope is high, right? If you're starting, it's summertime, you're about to start a new year. Again, a great time to make some changes. You can do things differently this year than you did in previous years. Now, that doesn't mean radically changing what you've already been doing. It means integrating changes, smaller ones, over a period of time to create a big change. Now, the reason why this works, and here's an element of systems thinking, is something that's called a positive feedback loop. So a positive feedback loop is a relationship between elements that reinforces a pattern of growth. The easiest example of this that I like to provide is something like the interest in a savings account. For facility's sake, you put $1,000 into a bank account that gives you 10% interest. That would be awesome. So $1,000, 10% interest. The way interest works in that bank account is not a closed feedback loop, or what's called a negative feedback loop, where you'll receive the same amount of money every year. It's a positive feedback loop where growth is built into the system. So that $1,000 at the end of the first year with 10% interest will mean you have $1,100 at the end of that first year. Now the 10% interest in the second year will be pulled from not the initial $1,000 you put in, but the $1,100 you have at the end of the first year. So 10% of $1,100 is $110. So at the start of the third year, the 10% interest will be taken from the $2,200, right? If I did that correctly, but you understand. And the growth in that case is what we call exponential. It's one of the major facets of feedback loops in our society. It's It's a core element of capitalism, and it's, more success to the successful is a lot of how systems thinking talks about it. But this functions in very, very different ways. Okay, so we're not going to get too much onto that side of it, but think of a positive feedback loop in the same sort of way. If you make a number of small changes to your system or to your time management or your productivity, you won't see major yields at first necessarily, but over a longer period of time, which is typically what a degree process is, you will see exponential growth. So typically the line is not straight across when you make small changes. It starts a little lower and it builds and it builds and it reaches a threshold point where then it just increases exponentially. So I'm taking that sort of approach in this webinar because from my view, and the research also shows that it's more sustainable. It's easier to do than just trying to impart your will onto yourself and dramatically change the way you're doing things. So try thinking of your life as a system. Don't always do it, just for our purposes here today. It seems too much to me to be like, just think of your life as a system all the time. I don't think you need to plan and organize every single facet of everything you do. James Clear, I think, disagrees with that statement, but I think just for this purpose, you've got some clear goals here. They're related to your life as a whole in important ways in pursuing this degree. So for this moment, for the sake of this hour, let's take this on and give it a shot. With this view and the small changes in a sustainable way, think of this as an ongoing process of attention and reflection. You're going to be checking in with yourself regularly to see what's working and what's not. You know that multiple factors are dynamically connected to how well you're doing things, how well things are working out. It's not just however you might consider your ability or your talent or things like that. You've got multiple elements: how much sleep you're getting, how much exercise, how well you're eating, the other relationships in your life. All of these will put you in better or worse positions to be able to accomplish what you're setting out to accomplish here, right? So the idea is to, if you view all of these elements as causal or as impactful in the success of these outcomes, then you can pick and choose elements, knowing that improving them will improve your overall outcomes. So that's the overall idea. Now let's take a step back and reevaluate goals for a second. So sustainable new habits, I feel like it's going to be easier, like again, I mentioned before, instead of just relying on your willpower alone, to utilize things that make it easier to introduce new habits into your life. So why not consider intrinsic motivation? Okay, if you're intrinsically motivated, that means you're internally motivated to do something. That motivation generates itself in many respects, and it will increase your chances of bringing new behaviors, pattern behaviors, which are habits, into your life. So what better way to do this than to relate it to who you are, how you see yourself, or the type of person you want to become in your life? That's a really powerful level. It's a really motivating level of consideration for an outcome. So instead of thinking of something like, I've got a goal of losing weight, you want to become a healthy person instead. This is an identity-based outcome. So you're not only looking at the really tangible takeaway outcomes of, okay, I want to reduce my calories each day, which, can be more or less challenging depending on who we are and our circumstances, how we're currently living. But to start with the goal on a more identity-based level means you think of it in terms of wanting to become a healthy person. And you can start to ask yourself the types of questions like, what would a healthy person do in this circumstance? What type of choice would they make? Okay, you want to try to take it to that more fundamental level. So instead of wanting to read more, you know, you want to become a reader. You want to become the type of person that really enjoys engaging with new understanding, new knowledge, and integrates it into their lives as a part of their identity. You're known as a healthy person, a reader, those sorts of things. In our case, it's, you know, instead of I want to get a master's degree, it's I want to become a scholar, a successful professional, an accomplished artist. What drove you to pursue this degree now in the area you're getting it? It's probably connected to your identity in some important way. So when we start to think about goals or desirable outcomes, we should do our best to relate it back to that core kind of drive, value-based drive that brought us to do this in the first place. Taking a lot of the day-to-day habits that we want to try to integrate back to that level gives them a new perspective that might bring in a feedback loop of intrinsic motivation. We will be more motivated to integrate new note-taking and reading habits if we know that those are the sorts of things that a successful scholar learns in our field. And so that sort of consistency and attention to detail are the sorts of things that a scholar does, right? So it's, and that's who I want to become. So it's an identity shift there. So let's do a quick write. If you don't know what a quick write is, it's slightly different than a free write. A free write is write whatever comes to mind for a period of time. A quick write is write nonstop for a period of time, but do it based on some guiding questions, okay? So here are our guiding questions. Identity-based goals, it's hard to start with who do I want to become? That can be challenging. So to work backwards from that, let's start with the results, a more straightforward question. So over the next 5, maybe 10 minutes, I want you to work through at least these first 2 questions and maybe beginning the third. The first is going to be, what results do I want? So examples of this are, I want to get a 4.0. I want to produce exciting research. I want to learn a lot about some topic, right? And then after you've brainstormed kind of a list of those, you know, this is a reflective exercise. Go into yourself and think about, you know, exactly what results you want. Then from that, extrapolate. What kind of person would make that happen? What kind of person gets a 4.0? Not thinking of it in terms of, oh, an extremely talented person, something along those lines. A person who works hard, let's say, a person who has a strong attention to detail, a person who's willing to recognize what they don't know so that they can grow, right? They have a growth mindset, maybe. They go and they target that area of misunderstanding or lack of knowledge, and they do something about it, right? So it's those sorts of traits. It's those sorts of habits, okay, which is question 3. What sort of habits then does a consistent person who gets a 4.0, what kind of habits do they have? Okay, so 5 to 10 minutes. Let's start with 5 because that took a little longer than I'd hoped. So about 5 minutes, start with question 1 and then move into question 2. All right, so let's just take about 1 more minute here to wrap up whatever you're writing right now. And so now I'm going to split everyone up into a pair, into breakout groups, for you to just have a quick discussion about your initial thoughts on this, right? So about 2 minutes each person, right? Just sharing a bit about, what type of results you brainstormed. You don't have to share all of them, of course. If some of them you think are too personal, you don't have to, but just maybe some of the results and then what kind of person would make that happen. You would be there's a lot of overlap here typically when we pursue we're all in a similar boat here pursuing a graduate degree. So I'm going to split everyone up here into breakout groups and about 2 minutes for each person. All right, it looks like we're all back now. I apologize if you got cut off there, but hopefully that quick share with a group helped you, reflect on your own initial thoughts for the two questions and maybe gave you some ideas too. As I mentioned, I typically see a lot of overlap in these sorts of goals, the type of people that we want to become and why we're pursuing a graduate degree. So thank you so much for doing that. And now we're going to move on to the next part of this, which, hopefully you have a sense of some maybe identity-based goals, or either way you've thought a bit about, okay, what kind of habits, what kind of traits, do I want to bring, or the type of person, that I want to become to this new beginning or this new year, right? Maybe reevaluate what I've already been doing, shift it a little bit. So as I've mentioned briefly a few times, systems are made of numerous factors with relationships. A system produces its own behavior. So a system is more than the sum of its parts. It's a collection of all of those different elements related to each other in some sort of way that produces patterns of outcomes. That's more or less what our daily lives are. So multiple factors, therefore, affect your efficiency and effectiveness. And the idea with the system is, okay, I want to amplify positive habits, maybe shift negative ones to help me improve what I'm currently doing in managing my time and in, my system of productivity or efficiency, those sorts of things. So an example of this is, let's say you want to write a better paper, you want to be a better writer. So some of that's going to have to do with skills-based things that we can help you with at the Center for Writing and Rhetoric, an improvement in critical thinking, understanding conventions of a field, improving the cohesion of paragraphs, the construction of sentences. Those are a set of skills that will improve your writing. But what a system view will bring to that is it's all of those elements, plus maybe improving your sleeping, eating, relaxation, exercise. Those sorts of things will and have definitively been found in research to improve the way that we learn and the way that we produce, right? So all of those will contribute to an overall system of productivity, of efficiency or effectiveness. And as you start to view things a bit more interconnectedly, you'll see that, okay, if I can improve, my exercise a little bit, let's say I add 1 day a week to start or something like that. I'm gonna, try a new relaxation technique of some sort. All of those sorts of things over time will start to improve your overall ability to write better papers. That's the idea. So we want to try to look at this a bit more holistically. Then of course, reading and note-taking habits, all of those will contribute. So instead of, I want to write better, so I'm just going to work on how I put things down on a page, it's doing that plus improving an overall system. Okay. So step one in doing this, as is true of so many things, is to just understand where you're at right now. So step one is self-evaluation. It's increasing self-transparency. So through a process of self-assessment, you just get a better sense of what you're actually doing now. So how are you currently spending your time? You can do this in a few different ways. James Clear talks about, making a list of your daily habits. So starting at the very beginning, you just go through with like a list or a simple table, and you just fill out, these are all the habits I do on a usual day. Another way of doing this is just keeping track of how you spend your time over a week. So some apps like Toggle, Time Harvest, Time Doctor, Harvest, not sure about Timely anymore, but so definitely some of those, and there are others. There are actually a number of apps for this sort of habit work, but that will just help you keep track of what you do over a week. And it'll do it partly by tracking what you do on your phone, what's in your calendar, and then part of it is something that you have to log as well. But so you can either use an app, you can just write it down, and without judgment, this isn't the time. Step one is just getting a clear picture. You just assess how you're actually spending your time for that first week, okay? And then you take a look at those lists, or what's going on in the app, and then you start to do some evaluation. You start to gauge, this habit will help me reach my desired outcomes. This use of my time over here doesn't, right? And then so you start to, and these other ones are, it's kind of neutral, like harmless, also not super geared towards my desired outcomes, but that's a part of life. Like there are many neutral habits, right, as well, that are just a part of life. So you go through and then you start to get a picture. You start to get an idea of what you're working with. You need that before you jump in. Here's an example of, this is an older one, unfortunately, so I'm not sure. I don't use an app to do this when I do my recheck-ins. But this is kind of an idea of what an app looked like a few years ago for someone who graciously provided their example while writing their dissertation. So as you can see, it's simplified in some sense because they just have dissertation writing and dissertation reading as two different categories. But you can also see that there are a lot of, you can get a good sense, right? Like running, television, you start to understand how you're spending your time, and then you see where it's kind of fitting in and what actually occurs over the course of the week. This can be very enlightening. We often fall into autopilot. That's the nature of the human brain, right? It tries to reduce conscious attention, conscious decision making as much as possible, right? It tries to automate, both from like visual perception, like to those sorts of core functions, all the way up to like things like decision making. We have shortcuts, heuristics that the brain develops over time, as well as then our habits, right? So once a habit gets integrated where it doesn't employ a lot of conscious attention, it doesn't employ a lot of conscious decision making, there's less stress on the brain, and that can be diverted to other activities, right? So a number of things, a lot of what we do over the course of a day and a week is going to be things that we're not fully conscious of. And step one is taking that unconscious into our conscious awareness. Then with that, you can start to shift, right? So that the key takeaway for the shift, two key takeaways. The first is be more detailed than you probably want to be up front. One of the takeaways from neuropsychological research on this is that numerous studies have shown that folks who set an intention for a new behavior and then add to that a specific time and location to do that new action, the period of time of integrating a new behavior so that it becomes a bit more unconscious, it becomes a habit you don't even think about. People more often actually followed through on those new behaviors if they gave it a time and a place. So when you start to think of new actions that you want to integrate, right? I want to read for, I want to read, 5 journal articles a week. I will read 1 journal article at my desk, or no, at this time or at my desk type thing, right? You want to give it a time and a location. You want to make it really specific in that way. Okay. The other technique is to try to tie any sort of new behavior that you want to develop onto ones you already have, because it's going to be easier to associate something new with something already well established that you don't have to think about it. So then that association will group those two things together over time more quickly and more easily, which without as much reliance on willpower and effort, so that it'll happen more naturally. So the example here that I've given for that is something along the lines of at the end of each class session, right? Maybe when the material is still fresh in your mind, I will spend 15 to 20 minutes reviewing my notes and create takeaways, key questions, other important ideas. So it's not hard for you, let's say in this example, to show up to class and to pay attention and to be engaged. So because of that, that's already, you know, a behavior that doesn't take a lot of willpower and effort, maybe even a habit, right? You show up and you do it well. So let's tie to that the sort of like deeper reflection and brainstorming work, the sort of things that might, you know, create ideas for the final term paper at the end of the class, or for even like a culminating project of some sort, or, you know, any other sort of thing in between. You just tie on that sort of important, like reflective, critical analysis type thinking that's a part of learning at the graduate level to the already established activity that you have of attending class and paying attention. Typically it's fresh there. So you try to come up with strategies and ideas to bind new activities, new habits to already existing ones to help facilitate actual sustained development of those. And then another important thing is to change your environment. And this is even more important now that fall is going to be online and that with the pandemic, everything is online. So set up a work area for yourself, okay? Start to build associations that space is for schoolwork and help create a mental shift. We just facilitated a week-long dissertation boot camp at the Center for Writing and Rhetoric a couple weeks ago now. And I went through and we had a conversation about something similar to this. When I was writing my dissertation, had a playlist and I dropped maybe 4 or 5 albums in there. And to this day, I play any of those albums and it brings back the ritual that I had of writing. It takes me into a zone. And that was established over time. I had a certain ritual where I did certain things leading up to writing, and I only listened to a few albums over time. Over time, and even if I repeated them, there was a cognitive recognition, right? Like I used it to trigger a shift in mindset. And almost everyone at the boot camp had something as well. Some examples were specific candles, specific scents. People would light, you know, they had 2 or 3 different types of candles. They would light them. They knew it was work time. One person had their dissertation mug, right? One person might have had a messy desk, but they also had a system for cleaning it up. So once it was cleaned up and was put in a certain way, then they knew it was work time. They had gone through the process of rearranging, putting things in their places, and then it was time to work. For me, it was really music. And then I also had a ritual of like almost meditation where I would stop and kind of go back to times where I used to play sports and do martial arts and things where I really would have competition and be really focused. And I would recall the way that I've, you know, would focus in for like game time and try to reproduce that when I would sit. I made writing the same sort of process. And then the other thing that to change your environment is to utilize community. Of course, that boot camp's a perfect example of this, but no matter what stage you're at, writing groups or study groups, a group of people coming together to write, just even if you're on the computer together, will, you know, create an environment where that work is easier to do for everyone because everyone's there with the same purpose in the same place to get the same sort of thing done. And we can help set you up with those at the center. One of the last things here, it's getting close to time for Q&A and I want to be able to leave it. So I created this PowerPoint really as a reference document as much as just like a presentation set of slides. So when you receive this, you'll see more content that we haven't been able to get to today that tied with the files that you were sent before the workshop can help you start to, you know, look at this in terms of, you know, your entire trajectory of your career and the major milestones within that, to planning a single week or for a single semester. But one of the other things that I just want to touch on is also using desire to give yourself rewards. So if something is especially difficult for you, tie it with something you enjoy. So it can be helpful, you know, if I know that after I finish reading the first 10 pages of this journal article, I don't have to read all 22, but after the first 10, I know that I'm going to take my dog for a walk, and I've scheduled in enough time to do that, come back and then read the next 10 pages, or to check Instagram, watch an episode on Netflix, that sort of thing. So to understand and utilize rewards to help inspire you to push through sometimes challenging new tasks. And then finally, I want to leave you with just the overall notion of investing time to save yourself time. So do some work up front to pay attention to when you work best, what time, what are the conditions. Then with that information, use that knowledge to plan better. Schedule harder tasks at your most productive time. Pay attention to how long. You'll start off reading 20-page journal articles, for example. It'll take you a certain amount of time. And then the more you learn about the field, the more you learn about different research, the more you kind of improve your chops at reading this new language, this academic writing. You'll find that it takes you less time. And so you want to, with that, use that information, right? You want to have the reflexivity and flexibility in your time management work to then go back and shift your plans based on this ongoing self-assessment. And then I recommend, you know, really intentionally taking time to developing a timekeeping system, something that works for you, and then sticking to it. And again, keeping in mind this flexibility. So how I typically do this is I set time aside to plan for the coming week. So typically on Sunday for me, or sometimes I get it in on Friday afternoon, I plan for the upcoming week. This is in addition to a lot of planning I already do, you know, making appointments and things in the future. And then I factor in not only that weekly planning time, but then all sorts of, you know, like for this hour-long webinar, I factored in other time to prepare for it, to do work for it. So all of that went onto my calendar. So I tried to be as organized as possible, and that can help you see snapshots. And then utilizing things like time management tools, like citation management systems, and other sorts of, you know, software or things that can help you understand, you know, what your week is going to look like for that weekly planning. Going through a process at the beginning of every semester so that you can factor in just key elements over the semester. Having a sense of what the overall journey is going to be like can be super helpful. And there's a great resource for that in the Ask binder, which can take you through, right, the entire degree, you know, as long as you've got your department handbook there too, to be able to understand what the specific requirements are. Here's an example of what that might look like for a PhD student that's going to have to do qualifying exams, typically in a proposal and a lot of other work. And then I included a section here on Zotero specifically. The library has a lot of help on this as well, which is something that I highly recommend doing at the beginning to save you a lot of time over the course of your entire degree. Start recording, taking notes, and, you know, creating this. As you can see here, there are notes and keywords as well as citations in Zotero, so you can really start to create this cache of everything you're reading and looking at for easy future reference. And if you start at the beginning, this can be a major time save in the future. So really, you want to conceptualize this as, let me invest some time up front and invest some time on a regular basis to habituate more and more of the important things that I need to do to be successful in my graduate degree, so that I can spend less time thinking about and actually doing those habits and focus my attention and my energy on new things. And then finally, a support system. I'm going to lead a symposium, or I'm going with Dr. Shamini Diaz and Preparing Future Faculty in a couple of weeks specifically on online learning. And I'm doing a session there on wellness where I'm going to talk about this a bit more, but you really need to utilize all the different support systems you have available to you. We at the Center for Writing and Rhetoric can talk about and work with a lot of this, but there are many other support systems that you want to interact with, including the library, faculty advisor, student life, and then other elements of your life to achieve some sort of balance. That is part of the system as well. Okay.